Welcome back to Redzone In the Lab podcast. I am Deuce, back from Atlanta on the victory over the Atlanta Falcons. Had a great time. The vibe was awesome. Everything was great. The Commanders' first road rally, was awesome. That was great. Met a lot of fans, and we got the win. The stadium was like, man, I heard that the owners were touring the stadium. I'm glad that they did because the stadium was magnificent. The tailgating was awesome, great. Atlanta, good peoples. Y'all treated us well. We definitely appreciate your hospitality, but so much better that we got the W. Today on the show, we do have NFL analyst Mark Bulluck joining us to kind of break down who Eric Bieniemy is through 6 weeks. What type of coordinator is he? Also, Jahan Dotson has been a whole lot on the timeline these past few weeks about Jahan Dotson. Is he getting enough targets? Is he not getting separation? What is going on? Do we need number 11 back to get? We definitely don't want that. But on the other side of this, we have NFL analyst Mark Bulluck is going to break all that down for us. See you on the other side.
Shoutout Redzone In the Lab podcast.
Hey, what up, y'all? It's Benjamin St. Jude's, DB for the Washington Commanders. I want to give a big shout out to Redzone In the Lab podcast.
Welcome back, Mark Bulluck. Glad to have you again, which is a family. It's like a cousin from over the pond to the show. We definitely appreciate you. How you been, Mark?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Doing good. Before we get into Eric Bieniemy, can you give me one thing that has been consistent as far as the offense since the season started, from all the way from week 1 to week 6? What is something that's been consistent?
The nature of having a young quarterback like Sam Howell is that the team is going to be up and down. So I guess one thing that has been consistent is that they have been up and down. But if you're looking for one consistently good thing, I think in general they've been able to move the ball pretty well. When obviously there hasn't been like a negative play, like a sack, and which I'm sure we're going to get into, and or like a penalty, or that kind of thing. When they're staying on schedule, they've moved the ball pretty well, pretty consistently, and the offense has done, I think, a pretty good job overall of sort of working between the 20s, getting into the red zone, and being relatively productive.
All right, Eric Bieniemy. All off season we talk about where he's come from, Kansas City, Andy Reid tree. We heard all types of things, but this is the first time, he even said, like, hey, I call plays. It was always a big thing in Austin. Did he or didn't he? He said that he did. But this is the first time it's his show from Sunday to Sunday. Like, people was giving him input. He's not giving the input now. So we kind of know more about who EB is as an offensive coordinator. So can you kind of break down who he is as an offensive coordinator, or is it still kind of maturing?
Yeah, there's definitely still a process because he's got a young quarterback in Sam Howell. And when you have a young quarterback that's in their first year in the system, you can't just throw the 5 years of what he's just been doing in Kansas City all at Sam Howell in one off season. So I think there has been a little bit of a limit in terms of what the Commanders' offense has been compared to what EB called with the Chiefs. But it's kind of just the natural course of things with a young quarterback that you only install a certain amount, you only run a certain amount to try to keep things as simple as possible for him. And I think one way you could kind of see the evidence for that is the amount of motion within this offense. And they motion a fair amount, but it's fairly basic motion where you might have a running back line up outside and motion back into the formation, or you might have a tight end line up outside and motion back into the formation. Whereas if you watch the Chiefs offense, you'll see, on any given play, Travis Kelce might line up in line and then shift outside or motion across the formation, or you'll have sometimes a running back motion outside and then a wide receiver motion into the backfield, and all sorts of crazy motions going on with Kansas City. So it's not quite where I think Eric Bieniemy wants to be yet, but I think that is kind of just the natural way of things with a young quarterback. I think in general the offense has been pretty good. As I mentioned, when they've been able to avoid those negative plays and the sacks and stuff. I think Sam Howell has looked really good, and obviously that's the main thing to take away from this season is do they have a franchise quarterback in Sam Howell? And so they're running an offense that gives him the best opportunity to prove whether he is that or not. And it's been quite pass heavy. Obviously, some of the game situations have dictated that when you fall behind, you need to pass to catch up quicker. But even in games where they've been leading, they've tended to lean more on the pass. But I kind of agree with that, where you have this group of receivers that are very deep. You want to try to get everyone the ball, and obviously not everyone can catch 10 passes every week. So you've got to spread the ball around. And to do that, you need to pass the ball more than you run it. So I think in general, Eric Bieniemy is doing a pretty good job. There's some nitpicky things here and there where there's quite a few. Certainly last week there was quite a few runs on like second and long where you're doing these what they call back on track runs where your first down play doesn't work and it's 2nd and 10, and so you think, well, we'll just hand the ball off and try to get in 3rd and manageable, and then that run gets stuffed and you're in 3rd and long. So that kind of call irritates me, but in general I think he's doing a pretty good job, and for the most part he's providing open looks for Sam Howell on his first or second read. And Howell seems to be, I think the biggest credit you can give Bieniemy is that Sam Howell doesn't look entirely lost out there. He seems to be understanding the offense, understanding the information he's being given pre-snap, and knowing that, okay, this motion means that I've got man coverage, or this motion means I've got zone coverage, so I need to work to my left instead of my right. And generally he knows where he's going with the ball. And obviously there are occasions like we've seen with the sacks where he holds on to it a little bit too long and isn't quite getting off his first or second read fast enough. But in general, he's doing a good job. And we haven't seen many plays where they're late out of the huddle and then they're not getting the snap off in time and there's a delay of game sort of thing. So I think that's a credit to Bieniemy and what he has installed in Washington so far.
Yeah, that's the quite opposite in Denver, because they get tons of delay of game penalties out there. So just to stick with Bieniemy a little more, I think it was after the Broncos game when the reporters was asking, why do you run more? Why do you run more? And like just listening to you pretty much say, hey, look, I may run the ball a little bit more, but to win in this league, you need to pass the ball. And then he had the infamous thing last week about the 55. About Andy would be proud of me. Like I think I'm pretty set that this is a passing team. Young quarterback or not, EB doesn't look. He's a coordinator that's going to pass the ball. This is a passing team, and we'll kind of incorporate some runs every now and then. Is that kind of your perception, Mark? Especially with a young quarterback, not so great offensive line.
Yeah, I thought we'd see some more runs incorporated than we have. I did always think it was going to be a little bit more pass heavy because the style of passing that they're going for, it's not necessarily like 7-step drops trying to launch the ball downfield every play. It's a lot of quick game stuff to get the ball out of Howell's hands quickly and into the hands of those receivers and letting them make plays. And you'll quite often hear coaches when they talk about like the West Coast offense and the quick game stuff, that quick game is kind of an extension of the run game for them. There has been a little bit more passing than necessarily expected, but it is going to be a pass first team when you have those three receivers and you have a good tight end, Logan Thomas, and you have some decent receivers at running back as well, that like you want to make use of that. And Howell's a young quarterback. Like, he's not like a 45-year-old quarterback whose arm's going to fall off if he throws more than 10 passes. He's able to sling the ball around, and that means that they can be varied with how they move guys around and generate matchups and try to exploit defenses. So that is kind of the way of the modern NFL. You look to create explosive plays passing the ball. You look to get a lead by passing the ball, and then once you have the lead and you're in the third or the fourth quarter and you're trying to hold on to the lead, that's when you start running the ball more and drawing out the clock and making it much harder for the opposition to get back into the game. But to get to that point, you have to earn that right by creating explosive plays and getting a lead, and the best way to do that is passing the ball.
Sam Howell, let's start with the negatives first. What are some negatives of Sam Howell?
The only real big negative that has consistently shown up has been the sacks, and you can't really get away from that. And he is on pace to have a record season in terms of the amount of sacks taken. And I think early on, a lot of people thought it was more on the offensive line than it actually is. More often than not, each week, if Howell is taking, say, 5 sacks a game, more often than not, 3 or 4 of those are his fault. He's just holding on to the ball too long, or he's made a little bit of a false read and didn't trust what he's seeing, or something like that. And I think part of that, Eric Bieniemy keeps making a great point, and on every podcast and stuff I go on, I keep bringing up the point of, it's a lot of the time when you see Sam Howell doing something, it's the first time he's been asked to do it. It's the first time he's doing it against a certain look or a certain coverage. And so that's naturally going to slow him down a little bit. And as he plays more and gets more reps, and, passing the ball so often early in the season has kind of expedited his development in this regard, because he's seen more looks because of it. But the more he sees, the more comfortable he's going to get, and the more he's going to, that his process is going to speed up, and he's going to be able to make the right reads and get the ball out quicker and avoid some of those sacks that are avoidable. Because while the offensive line isn't elite, it's not the Eagles' offensive line that can let their quarterback sit in the pocket for 5 seconds. It's
7-8 seconds.
Exactly. It's an offensive line that is sort of middle of the pack, and it's good enough to allow the quarterback to get through their first or second, sometimes their third read, and get the ball out in time of the concept that is called. What they're not necessarily good enough to do is maintain blocks beyond what is called. So if the offense calls a 3-step drop and they want the quarterback to be hitting their third step, or maybe taking a hitch step and then getting the ball out, they're good enough to make that block for that long. But then they're not going to necessarily maintain that, and then they shouldn't be expected to. Like when you call a 3-step drop, you typically ask the offensive lineman to be a little bit more aggressive in getting their hands on defenders and taking away their first move, so that they then have to slow down and react and think, okay, what's my second move? What's my third move? And by the time they do that, the ball should be out. So if that ball isn't coming out on time, then those offensive linemen are being put at a disadvantage by being so aggressive and potentially vulnerable to a second or third move. So that's the kind of thing that Sam needs to improve on, is making sure that his process is consistently quick, and he's consistently moving through his reads and getting the ball out as kind of designed in the offense, rather than staying too long on a receiver that he thinks maybe that guy might be open, maybe not. If he hesitates, he kind of needs to feel that if he's hesitating, he just needs to move on to the next read or take the check down underneath. So those are little things that I think is fairly common for a lot of quarterbacks, not necessarily to the rate that Howell is doing right now in terms of taking sacks, but also most young quarterbacks aren't passing as often as Howell is. So I think that those kind of play into each other a little bit as well.
Just you mentioned the 3-step drop and the offensive lineman engaging a little more aggressively, which makes perfect sense. Would that also help to negate like them getting defensive linemen in the air, just getting their hands up if they're engaged quickly to get the ball out?
Yeah, exactly. So like if you're calling a 3-step drop, generally the offensive line you'll see them use a lot of what are called quick sets, where rather than dropping back into a pass set and waiting for the defensive lineman to come at them, they'll take a step forward to the defender and look to get their hands on them, almost like they would on a run block. But obviously it's still pass protection, so they're not trying to knock a guy down the field, but they're trying to get their hands on them to disrupt whatever their first move might be. And kind of engage them quickly so that the defender has to think about what's going on in front of them rather than worrying about what the quarterback is looking at, where the ball's going. And by the time that they've kind of caught on to what the offensive lineman is doing, the ball is already out and thrown to the receiver and past them. So that's kind of the thing that this offense tries to do. It's not necessarily that they're running 3-step drops all the time, but it's more that the protection, each protection that's called is called to a certain concept. So if a concept is more of an intermediate concept, the protection will be there to protect the quarterback for taking a 5-step drop or maybe a 5-step drop and a hitch. But if the quarterback is then taking a second hitch or a third hitch up into the pocket, that's when the protection's not designed to last that long, and that's when plays can break down and then Howell can take some sacks. So obviously you could look to upgrade some of those offensive linemen in the future, and hopefully that would, like, you'd have a situation like you do in Philly where it doesn't matter how long the quarterback holds onto the ball for, they have forever in the pocket. But that could lead to some bad habits down the road. You would rather Sam Howell work through these bad habits right now and learn to be more efficient with his process, with his mental process, and speed things up and know that, hey, this is designed to be a 3-step drop or a 5-step drop. I've only got a certain amount of time before the ball needs to come out. And if the ball's not coming out on time, I need to just take my check down. And hopefully he's learning that. Like, you do see signs of it some weeks where he is more efficient getting the ball out. And there are some weeks where he's, seeing that, okay, they've taken away the main core of the concept. I'm just going to take my check down and move on. And that's good progress. But unfortunately, with quarterback development, progress isn't always linear. It's not like every week he's going to get incrementally better. Exactly. There's going to be a week where he's really good at it, and then the next week it's like, why did he take a step back? But it's not that. That's just how quarterback progress is. There's going to be ups and downs.
All right, positives from Sam Howell. What have you seen that's kind of put you kind of a little in awe about him, especially only having 7 starts, NFL starts so far?
Yeah, I think in general, like, you take away the sacks, and that is a big thing that you do have to look past. But you take away that, there's not a huge amount else to criticize him for. Like, as I mentioned with Eric Bieniemy earlier, that he's generally working through the progressions correctly. He's generally, like, this offense, because of the style of offense, they try to provide the quarterback with as much information pre-snap as possible. And I talked about motioning and stuff earlier, the different formations that they try to run things out of. It's all designed to give the quarterback information pre-snap so that he knows where. It simplifies things for him post-snap as long as he can process that information. And Sam Howell seems to be capable of processing that information pre-snap and understanding, okay, I've got this look, which means I need to work to my left, or I've got this look and that means I need to work to my right. And then I know I can key this defender and I can work either a deeper throw or an underneath throw, depending on how that defender plays his coverage. So, sorry.
There he is.
Gone out there. So that's the kind of thing that I think he's been doing really well. Obviously, the arm talent is fantastic as well. Like, you see some of those throws down the field where they've just missed out on a couple of really explosive plays. And we saw the Dotson drop last week. There was the the De'Ami Browns had a couple where they just missed his fingertips, and so they're inches away from a couple of really explosive plays that would, I think, really highlight just how good a deep ball thrower that Sam Howell is. And so if you hit on a couple of those over the next few weeks, then suddenly you're starting to negate some of those sacks with explosive plays, and I think the offense then suddenly looks like it's really good, and Sam Howell really looks like an exciting prospect.
I'm excited for him, to be honest. I'm really excited for him. And that goes into like a simple question. I know like there's different factions of the fan base. Some say they need to see more. Some is still living in the past. Not having what they say quarterback stability hell from the last whatever amount of years, and they just know I need to see more. I need to see more before I say Sam Howell is the guy. And it's probably still early, but what's your take as far as saying, you know what, regardless of the regime next year, this is going to be their guy?
Yeah, I tend to be more cautious because of we've seen quarterbacks have one or two decent games, or a spell of 4 or 5 decent games, and then they have a spell of where they show they're not necessarily as good as they think they are, and it's still very early in Sam Howell's career where teams are still learning exactly how they need to attack him, and it will be an ongoing process. Even if Sam Howell comes through the season and he looks like he can negate some of the sack issues and develop in that regard, if he then starts to, maybe he shows a weakness where he struggles against quarters coverage or something like that, just as an example. He doesn't, but for example, if you have teams start to feel like, oh, okay, against quarters coverage, he's not necessarily passing the ball as well, so we'll run a bunch of quarters coverages. Or against this look, if we rotate our safeties this way, he's not necessarily understanding what's happening pre and post snap, and we can confuse him and beat him that way. So there's going to be different ways that teams will learn to attack him the more that he plays and the more he puts on film. So it's going to be an ongoing process. I don't think you're going to get to the end of this year and think he's definitely the franchise quarterback. Or I think you could get to the end of this year and you can think that he's not the guy, but that it will be an ongoing process where you can get to the year and feel comfortable that, yeah, we want to keep developing him because he's shown some real good signs of progression. And I tend to lean more that way at this point. I think there is a lot to like about him. The main issue, as we've talked about, is the sacks. And I think some of those will be cut down on just from experience and learning and playing more frequently. So I tend to lean more towards the positive, but that there's some caution with that any quarterback, the more they play, the more they put on film, the more defenses are going to learn about them. And then they're going to have another spell of, there's almost going to be like a second wave and then a third wave of like, okay, he's struggling against this, so every team's going to throw this look at him, and then he figures that out, and then it's going to be, okay, well, this looks now doing better against him, so every team's going to throw that against him. And it's how he comes through that kind of second and third wave that's when you'll start to see that, okay, actually he can be the guy. So I'm optimistic about it, but you want to see him handle those kind of situations first.
Most definitely. Jahan Dotson. I'm not going to say why is he more successful, anything like that, because I don't think that's the case. But why did he produce more last year's first 6 or so, 4 or 5? I think he got hurt week 6. I think.
Yeah,
if I remember. Than he has this year.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of factors into it. Last year, he was a lot more of a factor in the red zone last year, where they were using his quickness to separate in the red zone and score some touchdowns. Like, he was leading rookie receivers with touchdowns through those first 6 weeks. So I think he was even leading the Commanders' entire team in terms of touchdowns. And that has fallen off this year. And that's kind of because Eric Bieniemy's offense it's more towards getting the receivers to occupy defenders. And you see that in Kansas City, the guys that score the receiving touchdowns it was obviously Travis Kelce at tight end, but after that it was Jerick McKinnon at running back, I think. I think he had 9 receiving touchdowns, and we've seen that this year where Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson both have a couple of receiving touchdowns. So when they get into the red zone, those guys are the guys that are catching the passes and making plays. So that's part of the reason why Dotson's production hasn't quite been to the level that it had been previously. But it's also it's an offense where they have so many playmakers. They don't have to force feed anyone the ball. They don't have to be like, okay, this is our first round pick. We want to show him off. Let's get him the ball. Or we've got Terry McLaurin. We want to show him off, get him the ball. It's kind of an offense where we've got so many weapons. We know that all of them are capable of making plays and producing after the catch, as well as, making some good catches. We can kind of just allow the defense to almost pick their poison, and they can run certain concepts where, they isolate a single defender and he either has to pick, like, do I sink back deeper and cover the deeper route, or do I step up and cover the guy in the flat? And either way, he's going to be wrong. And that, on one play, he might sink back deeper, and that means the guy in the flat gets the ball. On the next play, he might come up and bite up on the flat, and that might mean the guy behind him gets the ball. And so it's just been a case of, like, early in the season, it just hasn't quite gone Dotson's way in that regard with those kind of concepts. But over the course of a season, that will even itself out. So like after the first few weeks of the year, everyone was saying, why is Terry McLaurin not getting involved? Right. Now we're saying, why is Jahan Dotson not getting involved? I'm sure in 3 or 4 weeks' time, it's going to be, where's Curtis Samuel? So I think it's just a case of they've got so many weapons that you can't feature everyone every single week. And over the course of a season, it will all even itself out, and they'll all be productive. But in the moment and in the spell of a 2 or 3 game spell, then you might see one receiver doesn't get the production and someone else does, and that's just kind of the way it's going to go.
So you kind of I kind of zero in like when those things is happening, right? We always trying to figure out why. But some of the things where I'm a little concerned, and I didn't really notice it last year, I didn't look for it, is it seems like sometimes he's not running his routes all the way through. And that can be an exaggeration, but I know you look at the tape more and you can kind of tell me if that's the case or not. It just seems like even when the ball is kind of going the other way, even before, because I think a few weeks ago there was a play when Sam went to him down, and it was kind of like an over, but it also looked like he wasn't going to anticipate the ball, so he kind of slowed up. Is that something you see with Jahan or no?
I wouldn't say it's something I'm seeing consistently with him. Okay. There are certain plays and concepts where receivers know they aren't getting the ball, and so they won't necessarily run the route with the same intensity that they might if they think they might be getting the ball. But that goes for most receivers in the league. I would say it's more just a case of his route running. Like I've seen some people suggest his route running has regressed, so that's just not true at all. He's still winning routes when he wants to, basically. And I wrote a piece on it recently where there was in the Bears game, they motioned him across the formation and he ran what I know as a quick seam concept, and it looks almost like a choice route where they kind of stem their route outside and then they cut across the defender's face and work inside towards the middle. And he'd beaten his defender easily with what was an excellent route. And Sam Howell was throwing him the ball, but the ball just got blocked at the line of scrimmage. A defensive lineman stuck their hand up and tipped it. And that can happen. But that just shouldn't take away the fact that Dotson, won his route and was probably on for a pretty big gain after the catch there. And even in the Falcons game, he ran this almost like a corner post route. Some people call it a Dino route, where he was lined up in the slot and he kind of angles the route inside, breaks back outside to a corner, and then breaks back into the post. And he wasn't anywhere near the primary read on that play. He was kind of more there to occupy deep defenders and open up stuff underneath. And in fact, I think it was Terry McLaurin that caught a pass on a deep over route on that play. But the route that Jahan Dotson ran, the poor guy in the slot trying to cover him had no idea where he was going. And by the time Dotson was breaking back into the post, his defender was outside and running into De'Ami Brown on the outside because he had no idea where Dotson was. So the route running is still there. And the ability to separate is definitely still there. For me, it really is just a case of it's still kind of early in the season and we're looking at a very small sample size. Like, it's not that long ago that it was 2 or 3 weeks ago where he caught that touchdown against the Eagles and they were trusting him in a big spot and he made a really nice catch for that touchdown that tied them the game. So yeah, I think it's just a case of we're in the middle of the season and in the NFL, every single game feels so huge, and it is, but if one thing happens in that game that stands out, it feels like it's the biggest problem in the world, where you kind of, once you can zoom out and look at a bigger picture view, it's like, okay, well, it's just a course of a few games. He's not been the one getting the targets, but it's not like they're deliberately not throwing him the ball. It's just that's how the progression of the play played out on that given week.
Makes sense. I appreciate that. Appreciate you joining today, Mark. Outside of the Substack, which I've been, I think 2 years now, I believe. I don't know, but it's awesome. It's awesome work. Just tell the people how they can subscribe and if there's any other projects you're working on.
Yeah, so
we want to get Mark back to DC. So Jason Wright, if you're watching this, Magic Johnson, if you guys are watching this, we want Mark back.
Yeah, my Substack is my main way to follow me. It's Bulluck's Film Room, it's Mark Bulluck. It's markbulluck.substack.com, and you can subscribe on there, and you get 3 or 4 posts a week breaking down whatever's gone on in the Commanders game. Typically a post on Sam Howell and then a couple of other posts on a few other players or scheme stuff and then what have you. And then I'm on Twitter at Mark Bulluck NFL, posting breakdowns and thoughts and stuff. So yeah, those are the main ways to follow me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all of you out there that is listening or watching. We definitely appreciate your time. We know it's very valuable for you to spend it with us. We definitely appreciate it. Remember, do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart, one love.